John, what's it mean to you to be inducted into the WA Racing Industry Hall of Fame?
Well, it's, the obvious is it's a remarkable and greatly valued acknowledgement, but, it just, I keep thinking there must be a second division. That's where I'm going into, because I feel incredibly humbled by the company that I'll be keeping. I did what I did because I loved it so much, and you don't do anything in your career with any ulterior motive like this. It's just something that's come along, but it's a wonderful thing to have your career acknowledged like that.
And your story is of interest, a promising tennis career side road, all of a sudden then into broadcasting, and the career just continued to blossom.
Funny thing was, even when I was always going to be a tennis player, that was all I ever dreamed of being as a kid, And I was, doing well as a junior. I was state's top junior a few years out of my age group and all of that. And I got to 16 and I started to get back troubles. But little knowing that by the time I was, before my 19th birthday, I'd be finished with tennis. And if you told me that when I was like 14 or 15, I would not have believed it. But at the same time, while that was happening, I was recording things all the time, and I was practicing singing and practicing acting and practicing talking, and eventually practicing commentating horse racing onto this big clunker tape recorder, with the old play record and the pause button and the microphone. And I used to hold it in front of the radio and tape all the great callers. And I don't know what really started me being interested in horse racing. I was taken to the races when I was a little boy by my sister and her boyfriend at the time, and I suppose that put the idea in my head. But it was an instant thing, and I used to love the storytelling. Race commentators in the 70s and the 60s used to have the time on the radio to be on air a couple of minutes before the race, a couple of minutes afterwards, and through the race. They'd come back and do dividends. They'd talk for another 5 minutes, and they were all great orators. And they won you over, they won me over. And it made me want to be one of them. But I never pursued that because I was going to be a tennis player. The minute I lost my tennis, I thought, what am I going to do now? I couldn't imagine working, in an office or something. I couldn't relate to the idea of it. So I said to my mum, I'm going to go and find Trevor Jenkins because I really admire him. I'm going to let him know how much I admire him. I'm going to put my best suit on. I want you to come with me. And we went to the races, and we found him. And we happened to find him in the bookmaker's ring. And I just walked straight up to him and I said, my name's John Hunt. How do you become a race caller? Because I want to be like you. And that was, Trevor will tell you, that was the day. I pestered him, and because I was well dressed and well presented and I was with my mother, I think he didn't dare say no. And he invited me up into the broadcast box. And the next week he organised me tickets to go. And I remember calling my first race, and I've got a tape of it. And it was just this kaleidoscopic blur, and I made 1,000 things wrong, and I couldn't say what I meant to say or anything. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew what the 1,000 things were. And the next time I went, there was only 900. And then it just got better and better and better. And I was working in 6 months.
And the road to success was a splintered journey. It wasn't strawberries and cream. There was a proliferation of various television stations and radio stations along the way.
I think nothing ever is when you sort of on a journey that takes you somewhere that you aspire to. There's always going to be pitfalls and things along the way, and there was with me. But I don't regret any of them because all of them led to the next good thing. And I think that's, no matter what walk of life you're in, you've got to accept the falls, get up in the morning and walk out the door again and acknowledge the sun shining and go looking for the next thing. The trick is getting up. You've got to, because there's no other option. And when I've always had very good timing, Wes, and it's just been accidental, but I've had very good timing. I got into commentating at a time that the first radio station that truly broadcast races as a profession was coming into being, 6PR. I got into Sky Channel. I was out of 6PR and looking for the next thing when Sky Channel was born in Perth, and they got me to host it. And when that ended and went to Sydney, George Grilicic quit at the Trots, and I took over that job. And all of these things were major watersheds in my career, but my timing was perfect each time.
Your recipe for success obviously is in the presentation. However, those that don't know you wouldn't understand that the reason for that success hails back to the preparation.
Yeah, preparation's everything, I think. You know, I used to go to the trots or the races or whatever it was, and in my mind, the job's already done. I knew that I had the story to tell no matter what won, who won, what the trainer was, the jockey, doesn't matter. I'd already prepped it. And you can only get to tell one of the 12 or one of the 10 or one of the 16. But they were ready to go. And that's recent. But I think, you know, if you asked any of the better commentators around in any sport, that they would tell you that they might sound like they know everything, but they actually just researched it that morning. I mean, you've got a good working knowledge, obviously. It's always there in your head. But the minutiae, the things that sort of make you sound like, gee, that was impressive, that you've learned that day. I mean, I used to prep everything, every race. I mean, you can't predict how the race is going to be run, and you can't, you know, invent what you're going to say. But I would have a litany of things ready to go should a certain thing arise. And, you know, and if they did, it made you sound like, wow, where did that come from? But, you know, I've already had it there waiting. It was just like in the storage vault waiting to let loose, you know. I remember James Matthew winning his 10th two-year-old race, and to remain unbeaten to that stage. And a good example of that is he was wearing number 10 saddlecloth. It was his 10th win of the season. And as he screamed down the straight, I said, you are now looking at a harness racing phenomenon who is now a perfect 10, because it was just the perfect time to say it. And that's what you save up. And you have an archive of those things.
Pure Steel was one of your favourites, but I suppose there's too many favourites to look back on?
The thing about Pure Steel was he taught me, as well as me just loving him as a great racehorse. I spent time with him, and I became his friend, and you know, that's another story, all of that. But I learned through him what the value is of describing the things that aren't so obvious in horse racing. Bravery, courage, will, attitude. You know, he had all of those things, and you know, it's easy to just call the horses in an order, but when you've got an animal like that, he can actually bring more out of you that you didn't actually know you had. And because I was so close to him and I could see the nuances within his character, that gave me a better understanding of the breed and what they're capable of. And so I fell in love with him, but he actually affected the way I broadcast into the future. I learned from him and from his owner, Russell Roberts, of course, to be more obvious. I mean, Russell told me so much about horses that I took to bed, you know. But I've seen many, many great horses. I hate comparing them. I mean, I'm the Mighty Quinn. How can you say, you know, he's the fastest horse I've ever seen and had sectionals in him. But you can't compare horses from era to era because the times all change, the speed they go changes. I mean, Simeon never broke 2 minutes, and yet he won 29 races in a row, including an Inter-Dominion and a pacing cup. You know, no one's ever going to tell me he wasn't a champion. And yet these days, you can't go to the trots and not be able to break 2 minutes. You wouldn't even get an invite. So, you know, the world changes in all those sorts of things, but you know a champion when you see one. And I think it's unfair on them sometimes to compare eras. And
WA blessed with champion harness racing horses.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. My timing was great because I came up in an era of champions. Mount Eden was just when I was getting started, and Johnny Tapp's call of Mount Eden winning the Miracle Mile is something that, more than any other single horse race, made me want to be a commentator. I'll never forget that. I was 13 years old, and his call of Mount Eden was just, I just wanted to be him. It was so exciting. And after him, Pure Steel was my first champion. I was straight out of the kindergarten, straight into the broadcast box, and boom, Pure Steel. It was incredible, and Satin over. And then I had Simeon straight away, then Village Kid, Pro Chevalier, Jack Morris a few years later, and then, later we had Baltic Eagle and the Falcon Strike, and I had the Norm's Daughter, Shandon, those sorts of horses along the way. The start of Quinny.
Now, putting you on the spot, what was your greatest race call? There would have been a few.
Oh, gee, I really don't have one, but I'll tell you the most exciting race I ever saw at Gloucester Park was the night the Harlem Boy beat Jack Morris and Franco Tiger in the Pacing Cup.
Into the straight, Franco Tiger, Hilarion Star, Jack Morris the outside. It's a sensational finish. Franco Tiger, Jack Morris, the Harlem Boy flying. The Harlem Boy getting up on the inside. He could beat them all. It's the greatest boilover in history.
I've never seen a race with so many things happen in it. So much aggression, so much genius, so much fly by the seat of your pants. It was just an amazing race with two great champions, and they both got beat because they spent the whole race trying to towel each other up, and they got nutted by a 66-1 shot on the line, and I just broke my voice calling it. It was the most amazing horse race. Westburn Grand Franco Weiss is probably one of my best. People like that one.
What about your worst call?
All the others? I don't know, Wes. You don't remember your worst calls.
Later on in your life, you ventured into writing, and we read Princess, the Miss Andretti story, and then A View from the Clouds, highlighting harness racing. That part of your career, how did you find that?
Well, it was something I always wanted to do and never had time to do, because you work so hard in our industry that, life's a blur and you just don't have time for those things. But I always wanted to. I wrote radio series and made all those films. That was my writing, and that was I couldn't have time for books as well. But when I finished, right, now I can write the books. And I wanted to write that story. You introduced me to it originally and led me to David Muller. And I had no intention of writing it. And then when I heard the story, I thought, this is a great story. This is what racing is all about. Someone needs to hear this story. This is one of the greatest stories I've ever chronicled. Not the greatest horse necessarily, but she's a great horse, but it was one of the greatest stories I've ever heard. And I thought, I want to write it. And I made it into a novel based on the true story. And that was the way I wrote it, And then the autobiography, I felt like I owe the industry this. This is my take on my time in it. This is really about them, and it's about the horses, and I'm just the narrator.
Was that an easier book to write?
No. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do is write about yourself. But I tried to tell it true as best I could. Nowadays,
there's a lot of travelling for yourself and June. Is there any more books on the horizon?
I don't know, Wes. You spoke to travel because we spend so much time travelling, and I spend so much time filming and then making the movies about the travel that I never seem to have time to do the rest. But I'm back being busy again. And also, I'm still doing work with the horses. I still make the films and keep visible that way a little bit. I hate sort of cutting myself off completely. I love the atmosphere of it all too much, and it's nice to have some sort of string to hang on to that still just keeps me in contact. And books take a long time, they took 3 years each to write, and it's really hard work. I have a lot of books in my head, but I don't know when I'll get to them if I do.
From a race calling point of view, you retired at the top of your game. Has there, in the decade or so since, has there been
cause to regret it?
Cause to regret or a flurry within to get back and call?
Yeah, look, you never stop missing it, but I've never had cause to regret it. I miss it, but I don't regret it, because The world's changed in that 10 years. You know, it's become much more computer orientated, and it's a different audience you're broadcasting to now. It's a time, I think, that the world has become a little bit more clinical in its presentation, and so is broadcasting, and I don't know that I would have belonged in it. I think that I got out just at the right time before people started blogging about everything you do.
Obviously not a fan of social media.
Well, it was not my world, and it would have been a lot to adapt to at a late stage.
Go get them, Hunty.
Go get them, Wesley.